we're going to talk about knife crime. Norman Brennan is here, former police officer, director of the Law and Order Foundation. We were told this morning new figures have shown that 19,292 knife offences took place in 2022. Most disturbingly of all, I would say, rural knife crime is up 56% since 2012, and there's a 116% increase in suspended sentences handed out since that time. We've still got massive numbers in Manchester, in London, in the West Midlands, over 1,000 in the last two, nearly 4,000 in the Metropolitan Police area of London. What we can say is that young men in particular, not just in cities now, but all over the country, are carrying more and more knives, but fewer of them are being locked up for it. Norman, a very good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning, Mike.
There's not much good news in these figures, but I suppose you wouldn't be surprised to see that the spread of knife crime is now sort of universally across the country.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not just a London or a major city problem now. There's really a village, town or city that has not been affected by knife crime and by high numbers. Well, we look at these figures, and I think that we've got to the stage now, Mike, where society expects to be a victim of knife crime or knife crime not to be effectively dealt with. Yeah. You give alarming figures, and they are alarming. I've read it. The sentencing has gone down since 2012 to now from 38% to 30%. So we're clearly not dealing with knife crime in an effective way. And on top of the figures that you highlight, 37,000 knives and bladed articles were seized off of suspects in the past 3 years. And when you think we rarely see police officers on the streets of now, the true figure is absolutely horrendous. And it will be so alarming that if the true figures were there would probably not be anybody in Britain that wouldn't say, why the hell isn't the government and the criminal justice system and the police doing their best, actually doing something effective about it?
I mean, looking at some of the stats that I've got in front of me, offences resulting in immediate custody in 2022, 5,790. I mean, that presumably means immediate custody after an incident has happened. So it's a serious enough incident the police have had to arrest that person and put them in custody.
And often these suspects have been caught a number of times with a knife or a bladed article. The maximum sentence is 4 years. Rarely anybody gets more than a few months. There is no deterrent. And I've been in law and order, as you know, for 43 years. And I haven't seen a single political party that's got a grip with the causes and effects of knife crime. And the reason why you need to deal with the causes is because if you don't know the causes, you can't deal with it. The effects are only too obvious to see. Many children are being stabbed. Many children are stabbing other children. 2 years ago in London, we had the highest knife homicide rate, 27, on record. What are we doing? What are we doing with these children? Because if they've got no hope, they've got no aim in life, and they're carrying knives, they have no fear of stabbing someone else. They are involved in cross-border crime. They're involved in knife crime. They're involved in robberies, and they see that as a lucrative living. And when they don't see any police officers on the streets, then they see very little deterrent. And where are these parents? There are children as young as 11, 12. Just the other day, there's an 11-year-old while on TikTok threatening police officers with a knife. And the police couldn't talk him out of dropping his knife. So rightly, they tasered him. Where was the outcry? Was the outcry against the youngsters that are carrying these knives, children that are carrying knives, or the police? Well, of course, it was the police that somehow were outraged about. What do we need to do about this, Mike? Well, I'll tell you what we need to do. And I said this when I was a serving police officer 20 years ago. We need 5 years mandatory sentencing for those that carry knives on our streets without lawful authority or reasonable excuse. You're more likely to be stabbed to death 3 times more than shot to death. Yet carry a firearm, it's a minimum of 5 years mandatory sentence. That just shows you the disparity. We need mass stop and search. It's clear from the 37,000 knives that police seized in 3 years when there's so few officers on the streets. We need a massive education programme. We need parents and these youngsters to start taking responsibility. Carrying a knife and stabbing people is not the fault of the police or society. It is fault of those that carry the knives. And if parents can't control their children, well, should these children actually be in their parents' custody? That is a good question. We also need mentors. We need to give these youngsters some hope for the future, because if this knife crime continues unabated and so out of control, it is an epidemic and it's a crisis. Normally we deal with epidemics and crises, but we don't. As I told you, in 43 years, knife crime has got worse and worse and worse. When I joined the police service in 1978, Mike, to finish off with, I rarely ever saw a child carrying a knife. They did, very few did. Murdering another child, almost unheard of. I've just given you the stats for London alone. 2 years ago, the highest number on record. Children are killing children, and no one, the government, the criminal justice system, and society as a whole, really seem to be getting a grip on knife crime. It's a crime that most people think cannot be dealt with. Well, if it can't be dealt with now, what hope have we got for the next generation when they come along and think carrying knives and stabbing people and robbing people and using it for self-defence is the norm? Because that's what it's like at the moment.
It is. And there's a doubling, slightly more than doubling actually, of the number of suspended sentences handed out, as you mentioned earlier. Is that because there's no room to put these people in prison?
Absolutely. Now, if somebody commits a crime, Mike, whatever the crime, and they've been given so many warnings, and there's 12 alternative sentences to actually go into prison, those that actually go to prison are sent to prison or a young offences institute because the crime is so serious or their criminal behaviour is so persistent that they need to be punished and society need to be protected. Well, all I ever see, and I'm sure you're the same, we follow each other on Twitter, we follow the news every day, is every day of the week there's a child or an adult, predominantly a young man, stabbed to death or in an intensive care bed in a mortuary, and parents are planning funerals instead of futures. If I can see that, and you can see that, Mike, how the hell can the government and the criminal justice system that we look to set laws and protect us by sentences not see it too? Or is it that they just haven't got a clue how to deal with it? They're trying to brush it under the carpet. Will you try and tell that to a parent bereft with their head in their hands in a mortuary with their child 6 feet away, saying, I hope that child, my child, is the last one that dies as a result of knife crime? How many times have we heard that, Mike?
I've
heard the thing.
It's a heartbreaking story, and I've spoken to many parents whose children have been lost to this awful crime. And every parent, actually, I've got teenage boys, every parent who's got teenagers worries about it all the time. Doesn't matter where they live in the country, because you know that there's an opportunity and a chance that if something goes wrong for a split second, if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's your kid that could get stabbed.
Absolutely. If I was the government, I would bring in, as I said earlier on, immediately, you carry a knife, whether you're a child or an adult, male or female, on the streets of Britain without lawful authority or reasonable excuse. 5 years mandatory sentencing. Unless there's exceptionally good reasons, you are kept in custody. I promise you this, Mike, is probably one of the most independent law and order advisors in Britain. Knife crime within 24 months would not be unheard of, but I promise you this, dozens of children, if not hundreds of children, would have been saved from being murdered, maimed, and having their lives destroyed. And society may walk the streets in a much safer atmosphere. The trouble is, no one listens to me, no one listens to these parents, and all we're going to do, Mike, in a year's time is talk about the next set of stats. Stats are great, but the thing is, they're so high, even a drop shows that they dropped from epidemic proportions. It's out of control. We haven't broken the circle, and sadly I've been discussing this for decades, and it's got worse and worse. Yeah, shocking state of affairs. Well, let's try and do it this time around, Norman. We'll do our very level best to try and make the people who are in charge of this country listen to this stuff. Former police officer, director of the Law and Order Foundation, Norman Brennan, passionate about knife crime, passionate about making it stop, passionate about doing something to change the terrible spiral of death and despair
which is now spreading not just into every city in this country, but also into every town and into every village, indeed. Knife crime spreading into rural areas, an incredibly high number now.